Hi everyone. So today I am talking again to my one of my favorite guests on this stream, Michael Pierce, the well-renowned YouTube typologist and writer of Motes and Beams. And I thought I reached out to him a couple of months ago because first of all I just enjoyed the conversation so much last time, and second because I had a few more ideas cooking about cognitive functions or information metabolism elements. And I thought it would be interesting to go through some of them with you, Michael. Because I know in your book, a key thing you go into is the idea of the I Ching, these sort of three sorts of dichotomies, if you okay, call them dichotomies, which come together to describe almost like the behavior, the movement, and the direction of the cognitive functions, and how this idea about what some of it is sort of rushing outwards, or if it's internally quite far more soft and far more um, disposed towards change, or it's far more internally solid but externally fluid, and that sort of idea. And I thought there was an interesting overlap with some of the ideas I was coming up with. Um, I've often talked about information dichotomies. This idea of these like five dichotomies, which if you put them all together, you get a good sense of what the information element is or cognitive function is. And I was thinking, a friend of mine called Ibrahim, who is also a sociologist, he said, well, mathematically speaking, it can't be five. It has to be seven because there are eight information elements, eight cognitive functions, and the number of dichotomies has to be the same as the number of the thing they're denoting minus one. So there had to be
Oh,
seven. So I was trying to think, okay, if it had to be seven, what could these extra two be? And I felt that I sort of realized it had to be the two which fit into all our discussion before about quadras. So it got me thinking in that direction.
yeah, yeah. Where we were talking about the how I in the book anyway had designated the two pure types versus the two hybrid types and trying to resolve that so it was more symmetrical. That's what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So it got me thinking.
I'd be curious to see what his because I am not very good at math. I am not a mathematically minded person, so I'd be very curious to see how that works out. That's one of those many little mathematical puzzle things where it's like, well, you see, if you work it out, then in order to have eight, you would think you'd need eight, but really you need seven because of such and such. And I'm like, oh, you're so brilliant. Sorry, continue.
I'm not sure yet of the mathematical rule for
Sure.
why the number of things defining something need to be the same number as the things being defined minus one. But it does make sense in that, at least in socionics, we use seven function dichotomies
Oh,
to talk
okay.
about the eight functions. So the function slots, leading, mobilizing, etc. So it
Right.
kind of makes sense from also a symmetrical standpoint. It'd have to be seven also for the information elements. And I was thinking, well, what other things are left to really describe? And I
Yeah.
was thinking, well, there has to be something that tells you why, say, extrovert intuition and introvert sensation go together.
Right.
Right? Why do they go together?
Or is this a question time for me or
Well,
to
I don't know. I
theorize?
don't know. No. That's what I'm saying. It's like it's almost a rhetorical question.
Right, right, right.
I just if you just look at the five information dichotomies, or actually, I wonder maybe you thought about this in maybe it's not an entirely rhetorical question because in writing about how the functions are motor beams, did you think about, for instance, what caused NE and SI to naturally pair up, or SC and NI, or the others?
Yeah. I think the way I approached it in the book anyway was I came at it from the perspective of this is I suppose there's a bit of well this is just how it is. But there's an element of that. But the reason there was an element of that is how do I put it? Is sort of Heraclitean in the sense of that's how the way it is in the same way that up and down are opposites. And once you grasp the total system, then it sort of makes sense. And so then you realize, oh, one side of the coin, the other side of the coin. So, but
Mm.
I have still thought about, so I've certainly thought about, okay, I was trying to do this in the book of come up with words and things that would describe what are these two functions, NE and SI, when you put them together and sort of see it as like the thing in itself, the Ding an sich, what would be a word to describe that that total thing? So I've associated some of this with NI of the sort of, oh, it's two sides of the same coin, but I want to stand back and see the whole beautiful thing. Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking now, it would be interesting to, rather than just sort of sit back and say, this is how it is, to try to actually provide a rationale. Because then you'd start asking questions like, well, what would theoretically happen if you had NE, if NE really combined with SE? What would happen, and what are the boundaries that force it into this other realm that make it so that other possibilities aren't logical, and can we label those? So I'm just kind of spitballing, but
that's you've
yeah,
harped onto it. That's exactly,
yes,
that is exactly what I was thinking about. I was thinking it didn't feel satisfactory to me.
yeah,
I was doing exactly what you were doing. I was thinking, right, we got these things in place, but how do NE and SI come together? Well, as you said, you step back, you look at it, they sort of come together, and I could describe that thing, whatever it
right.
is. But that's like, yeah, it's post hoc.
Yes, yes. I is sort of my perceiving function is like, oh, this is how it is, and then I can describe it afterwards. Is very yeah, post hoc. I suppose, because I'd always thought about it almost of like supremely post hoc. So normally I would say, well, it's justified post hoc, because it's like, well, if I'm going to describe black, I have to imply this notion of white. But there's almost something sort of NTP-ish about the, maybe I'm jumping way too much on this, but I almost feel it's like I have this little, my NTP sense, I almost feel like, is going off slightly of like, this feels like an NTP question that my NI would never normally ask, of like, what do you mean? What do you mean, Jack, that we can go even further? You can't. I don't know why I don't normally think you can go further, but I'm curious to see what Alice in Wonderland adventure you have in store for me.
Well, it's a bit like, I kind of see it, what we've been describing, right? Our conversation is a bit like NE and SI going together, or any others going together. It's a bit like some sort of quality that comes out of the ingredients that wasn't there before.
Right.
It's like Cartesian bounciness, or
Right.
you know, or sponginess, Cartesian
Right.
sponginess, the sponge cake. There's no quality of sponginess in the materials that make up the sponge cake.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. And looking at it, yeah, because I think my brain is instantly like, and that this is not to contradict your project at all. I'm just suddenly fascinated by why I wouldn't think to ask that question. And I do think it's a typological thing, because it's like, I think I would naturally think almost, I would start with the sponginess and then say, well, the sponginess divides into these two categories, but then together there's, it's just kind of interesting. It's almost like going in opposite directions. In any case,
sponginess. I'm trying to think what the opposite of sponginess is. Anti-sponginess. Something which doesn't take in things.
Yeah.
It actually pushes it out.
Yeah, I suppose it would be, you could,
springiness,
or repelling, or, I mean, I suppose you could do like porous versus solid, but porous isn't quite the same as spongy.
Yeah, and it can't be, actually, no, it can't be springiness. It has to be something which you have to push outwards, otherwise it collapses in on itself.
Right.
Yeah, because sponge push it down, it goes up again.
Right.
I don't know.
That's a question for another time. Otherwise, I'll literally sit here like, wait, oh, that's an interesting question. What would be the but no.
Oh, but if anyone asks why I'm sort of only half laughing or sort of half talking at the moment, it's because I've got this bad rib. I might have either a broken rib or a sprained rib muscle. So it's very painful if I cough or if I laugh too loud or if I breathe too deeply. So that's why I'm sort of in this sort of measured talking way, just so everyone's watching and wondering. Yeah.
Jack
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, can we not do the interview today, please?" And I'm like, "No, we must do it today." Sorry, I promised I wasn't going to make you laugh. Gosh dang it. It's so hard.
Well, I'm not laughing too much.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Well,
No,
I'm suppressing myself.
okay, good.
But yeah, I was thinking, okay, I think there is a quality. That's it. I think there is a quality in NE and SI that they both have in common,
Right.
and that is represents in two dichotomies, and those same two dichotomies are opposite in SE and NI.
Okay, yeah. Which I think I certainly imply in the book by trying to refer to them as the contextual perceiving versus the universal perceiving. I'm sort of touching on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But and that is actually kind of it as well.
Yeah.
There's contextuals one. I think that's one of them. I think there's another one that goes next to it, which then swaps around for on the rationality irrationality axis. Because rationality irrationality, that's like the key axis. All the rest go onto it. So whenever rationality and irrationality changes, half of the other dichotomies switch over. So static, dynamic, and extrovert, introvert switch over. Also internal, external, and detached, involved switch over. And it's the same for these last two. They also switch over between rational and irrational elements or functions, cognitive functions. And yeah, so I think universal and contextual, I think, is getting at the nub of this one. I think it's something to do. I sort of framed it in a more, and almost try to frame it as much of a fundamentalist way as possible, which is attractive and repulsive. Not in the sort of biased way. But it's a
right.
I'm not taking a dig by calling SE and NI repulsive or TE and FI repulsive.
Brad Pitt versus Igor. But no. Not quite what we mean here.
No.
We mean magnetic, electromagnetic kind of notion.
Yeah.
Inverse.
I think there's this idea in both of them of either bringing things together or moving things apart.
Right.
And universal and contextual fits in there quite well. Universal, everything is being brought together to understand it as a whole, whereas contextual, no, every different thing is separate.
Yeah.
And I would
separate
also
because you have one perspective that has to look, at different things at different times, whereas the universal wants to see it all at once from an outside perspective. Anyway, I cut you off. But
that's it.
Yeah.
Now I think it also changes a bit. We're moving from TE, we're moving to logic and ethics as opposed to sensation and intuition. Because I think that's where the second dichotomy sort of comes in. But let me just talk a bit about why I think NE and SI are both, I say, attractive, and SE and NI are repulsive. And I think the main thing there is that for NE and SI, I think of NE, yes, in some ways it's spanning outwards. It's accumulating lots of different contexts and ideas and possibilities. But I don't think it's them pushing those possibilities away from one another. It's almost seeking commonality. It's seeking ways in which this can go together. There's almost a positive aspect to that.
Right.
Rather than a negative aspect to it. It's like, oh, what else can also go into this?
Right. Yeah, well, actually, and you can see elements of that with FETI as well, because it certainly, because as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, because I tend to think of myself as a very synthetic thinker. I like to bring everything down, but I know that my wanting to unite everything into one perspective has a lot more to do with my TI. working through my NI, right? And
Yeah.
whereas with an INTJ in MBTI, or just the TE sort of side of the INFJ, say they would be focusing much more on distinguishing different things from each other in the field of view, which is it's something I noticed actually when talking with an INTJ friend of mine. This was years ago, but I was sort of surprised how he was, without even thinking about it, he sort of started doing this Aristotelian thing where he's like, so I realized that what we need to do is separate out and distinguish all these different sort of separate categories and analyze each one of them as its own separate thing. And there was something about the particular way in which he was doing that where I was like, oh, this is so messy though. This is so, but you created all these new entities. Thou shalt not, multiply entities needlessly. That's Occam's razor. I'm like, no, I want the one principle that sort of explains it all. So it's like he was just naturally doing that. And so that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something you've seen in typologies like objective personality.
Right. By the way, I'm terribly sorry because I do have that he used to be Dave Superpowers, correct?
Yeah,
that's how I knew him from way back. I don't think we've ever really known each other, but I'm familiar with his channel. I don't mean to derail things, but that's something maybe to discuss is I am terribly sorry if you're watching this, Dave Superpowers, and I'm sorry I can't remember what your real name is. Shows I'm a little out of touch with but I've been hearing about objective personality, and I'm like Einstein with quantum mechanics. It's like what have they been doing? What nonsense has Bohr been cooking up? Except this isn't nonsense, obviously, but I know like zero, other than some people complain that it's overly complicated and some people swear by it. So it's kind of, people are on different sides, but anyway.
I see it as being kind of like a deconstructed sandwich.
Oh,
in that, that's the kind of what I'm getting at. It's the idea that there are thousands of different types now, because each time they find a new coin, they use that to subdivide and subdivide.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're using it as an example of yeah.
And the key difference between that and a theory that's more Jungian is that Jungian typology can have that same amount of complexity. But what it does is it then has those different coins interact with each other to create certain effects. And those effects, by nature of their interaction, limit the amount of differentiation.
Yes.
Because you can't do this and also this. That's contradictory. Whereas if you're not looking at the interrelationships between the coins in that way, you just span out and out and out and out and out.
Yeah, which actually, the thing that popped into my head actually is, so I'm generally a fan, I know this is a bit controversial, but I'm generally a fan that Karl Marx was the equivalent of an INTJ, actually. And the reason for that is and it could be argued both ways because I'm by no means an expert in it, but at least in his approach to his dialectical materialism, maybe, and it could be argued it's not Marx himself, but it's a general trend that seized hold of the dialectical materialism, because the way that it's described strikes me as being kind of that way, where they're often attacking what they consider the principles of normal logic in favor of this dialectical logic, which is really just perception, where they're just saying every single thing is sort of slightly different from the other thing, and things change over time. And so it's almost like you just differentiate everything to its ultimate atoms. But it's all in this grand sweeping changing. I'm not describing it very well, but I saw that differentiation sort of mindset, which
I see in Marx almost a mix of some of the two.
Yeah.
In one, for instance, if you look at his life, going beyond all theory, he didn't really live like a separate individually capable human being. He almost lived for the point of, he lived to be, the room he existed in, his life around him, that did not matter. He needed to be a being in the zeitgeist. He
Right.
existed. He existed in the zeitgeist and not really in the real world. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, if you saw him at home, he lived in squalor.
Yes.
He didn't work for a living. The only thing he wanted to do was to write and to publish his ideas to get that into the
Yes.
zeitgeist.
Yes.
And in that sense, he was both. But the ideas he was putting forwards were ones which are saying it is not this, it is this. This
Right.
is the direction the world is going to go. Our economic society is going to.
Right.
And so I see, in some ways, he had he was repulsing in the ideas he was bringing about, but at the same time involving himself into that sort of greater collective.
Right.
Whereas if I look at someone
Right.
like Karl
Right.
Popper, on the other hand, I think everything there is repulsing in all respects.
For who? Sorry.
Karl Popper, the
Oh, Karl Popper. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I remember talking about that last time.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's certainly very prickly, as
mm,
we discussed. Yeah.
yes,
Um, separating everything out. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, actually, this is a slightly different topic, but the other thing I was thinking of is this helps to explain,
mhm,
um, because oh, what was it? So you have my relationship with
mm,
INTJs and
mhm,
sort of seeing them split things up in a way that I'm like, no, I want one principle, but also seeing an even more complicated version of that with NFP types, with the Delta Quadra,
yeah,
um, as I understand it in my MBTI way, where I had it a moment ago, but where it's like they do the same thing, but they also have this unitive aspect, which is the NESI, but it's
mm,
just, and so that actually might lead into the next part of our conversation is, okay, so what is the dichotomy then, which is making them separate from the beta quadra? Because it's like they
mm,
don't do the distinguishing things at the right time, as it were, from my
mm,
perspective. I mean, the way I normally
yeah,
represent it in my brain is it's almost like they're like, depending on which side you want to start with, they're like a single line, which is the unitary part, that's the NESI, and then it breaks into a bunch of branches, and that's the TEFI, that's the part that is like, no, everybody is a different individual, everybody needs to go their own way, to
mm,
oversimplify it. Whereas from my perspective, it's like, no, you start from all these different very different, equally valid perspectives, because I want to make everybody happy, and then
yeah,
you trace them up into one line, and then we all live together in harmony,
mm,
under the
yeah,
theocratic monarchy.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but
that's where I'm thinking that. Well, we could talk about the difference between just gamma and delta as a quadra, or
mhm.
there's also the differences between the cognitive functions making them up.
Right,
Um, and I think let me try and bridge both. So
sure.
my theory is that each quadra has all of its valued cognitive functions or information elements, um, ones which share in one dichotomy. So if you were to take alpha as an example, they are every single part of their valued information elements are attractive. They are
Right,
supremely attractive, I
right.
should say. And gammas are
This
supremely,
whole thing was just so you could say that, wasn't it?
yes,
Just kidding.
and gammas are supremely repulsive,
Yeah.
but not in that way. I need to come up with a nicer word that I
I
could
know
call
what
it.
you mean. Yeah, there's got to be a nicer word, but yeah, no, I know what you're saying.
I could call it pull push,
Pull push,
supreme pull and supreme push. I don't know.
supreme push, pure pull.
But on the other side, delta and beta, they are supreme in the other dichotomy and hybrid of attractive repulsive.
Right.
So I'd say that thing which
Oh,
they are,
I see.
yeah,
Yeah, almost kind of like a well, I can see it in my head, and I've lost it and I can't describe it, but like I can see, like,
mm,
I've got this image of an X, And like on this side, from one perspective, they're pure, but they're also hybrid. And it's the same way for the other two. So I see where you're going now.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd say the key difference, well, first of all, the things which TE, FI, NE, and SI all have in common, and the things which TI, SE, and NI and FE all have in common.
Ah, okay. And then even further show how those have their own sort of potential opposition to each other that mirrors the opposition the other way. Ah,
exactly.
I had not thought of this. I had always sort of kept them, I think, because I'd always imagined it as almost like this decision tree where they break and then they become more and more alienated from each other. But you're taking my decision tree and you're wrapping it around to connect it on the other side. Ooh,
yeah.
Okay.
Because that's the thing. These dichotomies are all equal to one another.
Yeah.
Maybe rational, irrationals like the prime one, but the rest are all equal. So you can split it out down another way.
Yeah.
Another way to actually get to SC versus SI at the end rather than before. So
yeah.
I think depending on which dichotomies you place first, it'll be a different decision tree.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I would say is that when it comes to the delta valued ones, I'll change that. I'll start with the beta ones. The beta valued cognitive functions, right? They are all affirming, validating, confirming. The idea is that this is what it is.
Yeah.
And they're saying this is what it is. This is the result. This is it. There's no questioning now. This is what it is. And the delta ones are actually the other way. It's like, no, what about this? Hang on a second. What about this? That doesn't work so well here. What do you mean about that? How do you know? So it's more questioning rather than declaring this is what it is.
Yeah. I actually have a story that would sit in there nicely. I have a very good ENFP friend who I used to run story ideas by because I was thinking for a while I was going to be a writer. And I still plan on being a writer, but maybe just not a science fiction writer. But I was passing these ideas, and it was actually extremely useful in that case, even though it had the potential to be very annoying, because I would be focused on, I already feel that this is a great idea, and I'm telling it to you because I want to see your shock and awe. Like, that's my unconscious thing. But they would just, literally, they would try to do this. It wasn't even natural. It's like they didn't feel that they were being helpful, like truly helpful, unless they could find little threads and tug on them and say, well, wait, but that doesn't make sense. Or they would ask all these little questions. And so, I mean, that confirms. I think in the past, I've always related that as, well, that was our perceiving functions alone that was sort of NI versus NE alone. But you're arguing it's actually extends down further, that there's more going on there.
Yeah, and it's because I was an earlier concept I was thinking about. I got this partly from a sociologist called Rowan LaPlante, and I sort of adapted it. He was talking about TE and FI being about source integrity, and TIFE being about source fluidity. And I thought, well, is that really what it's about? I think there's sort of, I thought about it and I came up with a different understanding. That TIFE were clarity seeking and TEFI were integrity seeking.
Right.
The idea that TIFE is saying, no, these are the categories. This is how it fit. This is the way in which it actually fits together and makes sense. And they end up simplifying the data to make it more clear, people to understand and actually work on. Okay, this is our understanding. This is our gestalt. Whereas TEFI is integrity seeking about, no, what about this? What about that? What about that? All the shades of gray in and around the clarity they're focusing on. And so it depends on the context, and that context depends on the situation.
So it almost, the image I have in my head now is it's the integrity seeking almost has this, it's like they want this this truth or this honesty, but it's this internal, in a way, for lack of any better word. It's internal sort of not caring as much if it seems opaque from the outside, because what's important is, well, you've got to get inside of the thing, and then you see, like you were saying, how in all these different situations it's actually always consistent, even if it doesn't seem so from the outside. Whereas with clarity seeking, it's like it's like a transparent cube. It needs to be transparent from the outside looking. It has this. We're lacking words. I'm not trying to. I'm not perceiving it as just being dissolved into an internal external thing alone. Those are just the only words I have available. Like, that's actually very interesting though, because that's one of the things that will frustrate me about both delta and gamma types, particularly when reading philosophy, is that they seem much more concerned with whether, like, from my perspective, it's like whether or not they're being true to themselves rather than being clear to me. Like, I need you to, sometimes I need you to fudge a little bit on how you feel so that I can grasp what you're saying. Like, you need to be able to do different, and that's sort of the thing. Like,
but and I think also, if I were to go back to Einstein, God does not play dice with quantum mechanics. It applied very well here.
Right.
Because quantum mechanics, the idea, is it a wave? Is it a particle? It's both. It could be neither. We don't really know, but we're looking at what we observe here. And it's all
like, what's the problem, Einstein?
Yeah. And Einstein said, no, but that completely disrupts the clarity of a model I put forth. This idea that actually the world is a classically predictable universe. And I've just made it a bit more interesting and complex in terms of how that predictability works. You're now breaking with that to create something which is almost random in terms of how it works. God does not play dice. It can't have this sort of idea of randomness. It doesn't fit with anything else we've had. How can the macro world be predictable, but the micro world be unpredictable?
Right.
And so it completely distorted the clarity. But it did have integrity in terms of what they'd observed. But this is what we've observed. I know it doesn't make sense, but who cares? This is what we've observed.
Right. And I'm just thinking through my head. Yeah, well, we'll keep going. I don't know if I have thoughts at this moment, but yeah.
So by the idea of T and Fi, they both have two things in common. They have this repulsive quality, and they have and they have this.
Just go with it. Just go with
it. This devalidating, uncertainty creating quality as well. They are adding doubt to the picture, not removing doubt from the picture, you could say, or removing certainty rather than adding certainty. So they are the unclear, repulsive functions, whereas Ti and Fe are the clear, attractive functions, you could say.
Yeah.
And Ne and Si are unclear again, but they are attractive. And Se and Ni are clear but repulsive.
Right. Okay. Right, because repulsive in the sense that they are trying to separate everything out and look at each thing individually, but clear in that they want everything to still be clearly understood.
And what I mean by repulsive for SE. And why is SE repulsive? Well, I can't, at some point I need a lot of force to actually combine these two things.
Right.
There's an electromagnetic force causing the atoms to repel each other in these two things. So
yes, they're two separate objects. That's interesting because I remember it was with a different ENFP, and we were discussing the sensation functions, and that was very interesting because I was trying to describe what SE was like when I try to go into an SE mode, and I didn't understand it at the time, but the difference between the two of us was that everything was, it's exactly what you've been saying, where objects are distinct from each other. I want to grasp, the microphone I have here. It is the microphone. It's already defined as the microphone, or I could split it up into individual parts, and I could go all the way down to the atoms if I wanted, and I could go all the way back up. But with it's already given. as an object out there that I can then examine and look at all the pretty individual details, whereas SI has this ability to sort of, from my perspective, fuzz things so that things can be blurred together because they don't, it's as though they are not seeing the things themselves. My perspective, it's like, no, I'm seeing the actual stuff on it. SI is running it through this from my perspective, running it through this internal system, which then is able to combine things and say, well, no, actually, these two things put together actually form their own new unity. And I'm like, but they don't, because when you have to hold them together. No, it's a microphone and another thing, and you duct taped them together. Because SI and this blurs into NE, where I will see NE's ability to take these already existing things and combine them together in these different ways. And it's just interesting because it's like I can't do it with the same nimbleness. Like I can, my creativity doesn't have this combinatory element to it per se. It's this much more, I'll just create something out of the blue from inside of myself and impose that, which is, it's interesting when me and my dad will play certain kinds of games and anything. But anyway, you have an idea.
But that's also that interesting point, because distinctness of objects itself doesn't confer repulsiveness. That works for SE,
right?
But for NE does have distinctness of objects because it's extroverted and it's static. So there is a diverse number of different things,
right?
SE and NE, but NE is almost like quantum entanglement. It's spanning across all these different things and finding out how they could combine, how they could come together.
Okay, yeah. So it's almost like you drawing these. I always think in these images, it's like you have the distinct objects, but there's these little lines drawn between each of them, and some of the lines are stronger, and they're all mapped out. Whereas for me, there's something that seems messy about that, and it's like, well, if I'm going to combine them, then I'm just going to put them together and make them into, well, this is the essence of this and this is the essence of this. I want to, talking with John Barnes, my ENTP friend, plug for his channel, John Barnes MBTI. But anyway, we were talking about this one time of this sort of, it was interesting. He was trying to talk about NE versus NI and their tendencies, and how NI was almost like he was using this image of like, I was trying to go up to the top peak of this mountain. I was like this vertical motion, whereas NE was thinking in sort of these rings that go, and they're separate rings, but they go up the mountain as well, but he has to hop, and he's more interested in going around and seeing all the different objects. Because when I read books that are written by people who have more NE, usually NTP books, I sometimes get very frustrated because I'm like, you've given me 5 examples of what I see as essentially the exact same thing. I only needed 1 example and I already got the principle. Like reading The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, if anybody remembers that book. I was like furiously scribbling in the margins because I had to do jury duty. So I decided to bring this book with me of all books, and didn't realize how straight it was like the ultimate example of INFJ ENTP not quite fitting together, because I think he's very ENTP.
I thought ENFP for him.
Oh, really?
That'd be even more of an effect.
Yeah, well, it certainly would explain some. I had it in my head ENTP, but that would actually be very interesting.
Yeah,
I'll have to go back over it from that perspective.
I think there's a complete absence of TI. He also, like Pinker, they have the example.
Yes. Yeah, and he in fact, I was also, for whatever reason, bothered by the fact that he started it out with sort of this autobiographical detail. And there was, normally it's like in other situations, I know it wouldn't bother me, but for some reason in this situation, the placement of it, I was just like, I don't care, Jonathan. This is irrelevant material. Like I was reading and I'm like, all I needed to know from the book was the 3 headings that you used to divide the book. And I already know everything I need to know. This is my hubris, of course, to some degree, but I get the same. So actually, yeah, okay, I'll need to go back over it, and because for whatever reason I had it in my head, ENTP. I don't know why, but now that I think about it, I do think there are more similarities between my problems when reading that book and other NFP philosophers like this will sound, because Derrida is like incomprehensible, but even in the times when I'm able to understand, yeah. Even when I'm able to understand him, there are many times when sometimes I'm like, oh, that's brilliant, and then but it's like he does it as an offhand comment, and then he's like, but I'm much more interested in making all these veiled references to my personal life, and I'm like, I don't care. I don't care about it. Get to the point. But anyway, it's interesting.
But that's the interesting thing. Relevance.
Yeah.
Relevance already suggests, right? First of all, a repulsive quality.
Yeah.
This is not relevance. Is this, that is not.
Yes.
Also, it confers certainty rather than uncertainty.
Yes.
Relevance, I think, comes from that NI, because it's that ineffable truth which goes above and beyond everything else. It is the peak of the mountain. It is the heavens which shines above the mortal realm. In that respect, it is defined from what it is not, and that what it is not is but by moving away from what it is not, it becomes more certain and more clear. But at the same time, it's not static. It's not just composed of discrete different parts which tessellate or interact. No, it's also a whole, but it's a holism that is not absorbing more into itself. Whereas I see SI, on the other hand, as being a bit more like the blob. You know those movies where there's big sort of amorphous structures absorbing and integrating everything into itself.
Yeah.
Like a digestive process. I see that as being more SI. But NI, no, I think is actually trying to push more and more things out. And by doing it, is actually rarefying itself.
Yeah. Like air. So that's interesting because as you're talking, because like I've been saying before with SI, there's almost this tendency I see where what things that I would consider to be very separate objects, and I'm like, well, yeah, they're the same in like this platonic realm of like, well, they're of the same form, but you can't mistake them for the same thing, because that would ruin the kind of tree structure that I have going on, where it's like, okay, these are each individual, like Plato, I get instinctively. Whereas with SI, there's sort of will be this blurring between objects. You get this, I've noticed this, where in a lot of NFP literature or movies or things, there will be this tendency where there will be objects that have this very specific significance for the person writing the work or something, and there'll be these very ordinary objects from my perspective, and there's nothing from my perspective that is intrinsically interesting about the object in itself, and yet they will find this immense symbolic value in it. I'm maybe not describing it very well, but in it or in anything that has this, whatever they deem to have a resemblance to it. Whereas I'm just like, okay, that's interesting, but they're still different things from each other. Like I'm not describing it very well, but it's like a motif I see that crops up that usually helps me identify if the writer is probably NFP or even STJ, when there's just this different relationship to objects and their significance. I normally associate it with SI combined with FI, but whereas,
I wonder, because to some degree, if it's SI and FI, well, I'm trying to think actually, because for you it's NI and TI, right? So it's going to be in that intellectual space. So if they're taking what seems to you to be a different attitude to the same zone, the same area, the same objects, but seeing meaning in these objects opposed to these objects, it's in the same field, that suggests to me it's going to be also intuitive and logical, but the opposite, maybe the NE and T as opposed to the NI and TI. And NIT,
Okay.
because they are both these sorts of certainty oriented, introverted, so already refining qualities, they are those two are going to be oriented around saying, well, NI especially, certainty in saying no, but TI also in saying these things need to be brought together and cohere, otherwise it's not going to work. And whereas with NE and TE, both uncertainty creating and both accumulating in their uncertainty creating, NE is seeing all different, bringing in more and more and more things which could be possible,
Right.
which is going against the relevant side. And TE is also going against the relevant side and that kind of clarity, that kind of certainty. And
Yeah.
TE bringing in the lack of clarity in terms of, well, it doesn't work here. It doesn't work here. Look at how it observes. It happens to not work there in that particular situation.
Right.
The rules don't apply here. And is adding more and more examples without getting to the underlying point. And so
Yes.
again, creates that frustration.
Yes.
When I think of SI and FI, on the other hand, I'm thinking of that in terms of, as opposed to FE and SE, one is going to be FE and SE are both certainty creators as well, but they're the extroverted sort in the both in an involved kind of way rather than intellectual kind of way. People in the moment interaction. So those are the ones which are going to be influencing and creating a change in people. SE will be almost making people more kind to make things or the world around them change. FE is going to be about transmitting messages which unite, bring together people, which then make people excited about something to act upon. So they're both
Right.
influencing and changing ones. But SI and FI are the least about influencing and changing, because one is trying to make sure that whatever comes in is comfortable, it sits well with its
Yeah.
other parts. It wants to absorb more things, but those things then need to actually be comfortable with one another. Otherwise, that's why it's still an introverted function. It's attractive, but it's still refining what it attracts,
Right.
rather than just accumulating and accumulating. And FI, on the other hand, is repulsive, but both are actually creating a lack of certainty. One's creating sort of a whole experience and effect and trying to focus on that rather than trying to push or impact in the world, just trying to
Right.
harmonize everything, even if it shouldn't really be harmonized to actually be clear. Oh, this is all get along, even though we're completely different, and that's not quite working.
Right.
And then FI is, yeah, that's the one which that sort of very sort of earnest, sincere reflection on how one personally feels. Well, I wanted to do this, but also I feel this way, and also I feel this way, and I feel this way with that particular thing. And so I'm not quite sure whether I should actually be in a relationship with her or not, because on the one side I see this, and the other side I'm worried about that kind of thing. And just more and more, again, it's integrity seeking. It's more and more shades of grey in reflecting the truth of how they feel towards something, without making that into a clearly manifestable message that can then be used to change someone. Because what does someone say to that sort of communication? What am I meant to do about it? Oh no, I'm just telling you how I feel. I'm not
Right, exactly. No, I'm laughing because that I've had that experience with a number of NFP types, particularly INFPs. I'm thinking specifically of one wonderful fellow he's a therapist actually, and when we've gotten to talking sometimes, and he many times without even thinking about it, he's just been like, yeah, you have to get away from the black and white. That is what is causing your stress. Think in terms of shades of gray, right? And all these different, and sometimes there was this part of me who was like, you hippie. Like you, like not really thinking that, but like this little part of me that's like, that doesn't, that's not relevant here. But like, yeah, like I've also seen with some ENFP friends where they just run through all these different possibilities of here's how I feel here, and here's how I feel here, and whereas I'm just like, I want to unify all these different, yes, they're distinct, but that's driving me nuts. I want to shave off some of the. Derrida is like the perfect example of like the ENFP philosopher par excellence, because his like whole thing that he's always doing is trying to pick out all the little details that other people have considered irrelevant and making them the most important thing to sort of derail everything. And in this way, kind of showing how all these. I think there was actually a story, not to.
I think that's very.
Yes, I think so. And then combining that with the additional side of the FITE, where there's that integrity seeking, where not only is he seeking these little details and sort of making the most important thing, rather than he regards this as almost a moral duty to do this, where he how do I describe it? It's like he views it as it's almost like he views it as, I have found these little details that nobody else has noticed, and they're like little orphans, and I'm going to take these little orphans and I'm going to raise them up, and then I'm going to train them, and they're going to go take vengeance on the people who marginalize them. Like that's kind of how I see it. It's an interesting.
But I wonder about that, because
okay,
first
here, I'm gonna shift positions real quick.
Right.
Just pardon me. I'm getting a little uncomfortable where I was at. Yeah. Sorry, not very professional. But
don't worry about it. But I could just first of all at the tail end, we're discussing about SI and FI. I say they are the most sort of inertia-oriented, precious of the cognitive functions, whereas SE and FE are the most. No, we've got to get up and move and
right.
change. But then going back to Derrida, I think it's interesting what you're saying there. There's clearly a pursuit of uncertainty.
Yes.
Certainty. He's definitely destabilizing rather than stabilizing the certainty. But in doing that, he seems to be trying to bring about a sense of this is the thing that actually we should be thinking about. There's a problem,
right.
Rather than saying, oh, just there's no structural certainty. Right. So there is structure. It's just there is some sort of meaning to this. It's just not where you were looking before.
Right.
And that makes me wonder about maybe an NTP rather than an FP. But I don't have a good reading of Derrida yet. I need to know that first, really. In the shark.
I mean, I could certainly brush up a lot more too. I talk about him a lot because he's so fascinating to me, but almost as like I don't want to say a foil, because I find so many of his ideas interesting, but I feel like I talk about him more than I maybe have a right to sometimes, because he's there's a lot of factors going on there, but
I think foil probably is the right sort of word, because there is contrast. There's also enough interaction for the different cogs to bite.
Yes.
To actually get some sort of interaction. Whereas if it's completely different, it just pass through one another, and it's not really a foil effect. So maybe foil does work.
Yeah. I feel like I see a foil element with sort of Peterson's great instinctive distaste for Derrida that he seems to have expressed. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I sense that insofar as he, to the extent that I see him as very similar to myself, I feel like I see very much the way that he thinks. I'm just like, I get it. Like, I just instantly get it. And I'm like, that's probably why you get this instinctive distrust of Derrida, is because, and that's what he emphasizes a lot, is that he sees it as Derrida is bringing in all these irrelevant things. And just because he loves to create chaos and disorder, he's sort of referencing him as this jester figure or joker figure. It's very interesting.
Although there's another thing I say about Jordan Peterson, he also does this with other things.
Yes.
So a good example, where he's looking into, say, the pay gap or the earnings gap between men and women. He says you can't use a single factor analysis, there are all these other factors you have to factor in.
Right.
You need it's a multivariate equation. Examples like that, when he's actually saying you haven't actually considered enough of information. Relevance is important, but also this idea that you can't use one thing to describe everything. As another thing, he goes into quite a lot. You can't use one thing. You can't describe everything in terms of power. It's also this. It's also that. It's also this. So he's got elements of both coming together. He's got elements of certainty and uncertainty coming together, I think. But I know I've often thought he was actually in the gamma quadrant rather than the beta quadrant.
Oh, okay. I feel like we've talked about this before. I think so. I actually think Derrida and Peterson come up in every single one of our discussions. So then I know it's me who brings it up. I know it's me.
I need to read a lot more. I know what Jordan Peterson thinks a lot better than I know what Derrida thinks.
Yeah, and that's very much, I think, their own fault. Because Peterson is just much easier to understand it for me anyway than Derrida was not aiming. He was explicitly not aiming to be understood in a way that I've come to associate with sort of more of an NFP. More specifically FITE. That's why I was so interested by the integrity seeking versus clarity seeking, because I feel like I've seen that in different writers and different people. So.
No, I see what you mean. I think there's because integrity seeking, because I'm trying to think, because integrity seeking, clarity seeking, that's not the same thing as also creating certainty.
Right.
Or uncertainty. No, that's not what I'm saying. Is it what I'm saying? Hang on. What am I actually trying to say? Yeah, sorry. Clarity seeking, integrity seeking. Yes, it is required to be uncertainty producing, but it's also repulsive in uncertainty producing. It's a repulsive kind rather than an attractive kind. And I'm saying that NE and SI also have that uncertainty creation. That's an attractive form rather than a repulsive form, because it's the idea of almost embracing lots of things which don't quite have relevance to one another. And it's that sort of idea which also could be off-putting to a beta, just as much as the repulsive kind was saying, no, this is this, that is that doesn't make sense, that doesn't fit together here, that doesn't account for all these sorts of variables. But with NE and SI, it's like saying, oh, but I could see something over there which could also have potential, and that could also fit in. And why can't we make Derrida and Jordan Peterson get along?
That's what I want to do, but I don't have any explicit comments on that at the moment. I don't. So I'm curious to. I don't know if we can at this point list in sort of a table the dichotomies we've been discussing and sort of review them over, because I think I'm actually getting a little mixed up.
Yes, I think that is a good idea. Let me get an Excel spreadsheet, and I can share screen.
Oh, sure.
Put them together.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd actually be perfect. Here, while you're doing that, I'm gonna shift something in my room real quick.
Yeah, sure. Right. Let's see. Okay. Right. I'm sharing this one. I'm going to let me see. So let's start off with rational/irrational.
Okay.
And I'll do like I'll bias it in one way. Rational. Any idea if it has an X, it's rational. If it doesn't have an X, it's not rational.
Okay.
Then there's
I see.
And I'll do each one. So let's start with NE Ni, Se, Si, Te, Ti, Fe, and Fi. Can you see that? Is that clear?
Yep.
Shall I zoom in? Okay.
No, it looks good to me.
Okay. So
maybe zoom in so that yeah, that way it's just a little more economical.
Yes. So already we have here.
Yep.
And then no X's for these ones. Then we have, I'll do external.
Okay.
And so this, in this case, these two and these two.
Right.
Then we
linking
have
up the sensation and thinking.
Yes. Then involved, as opposed to detached.
Right.
These two again, and these two. Then we got static, and we got extroverted.
Mm-hmm.
So this one, this one, this one, and this one, and extroverted, this one, this one, this one, and this one. Mm-hmm. Now, here's where we add in the new ones. So I'll do attractive. And I'll call it certain.
Sure.
Uncertain. But I'm not sure exactly the word is yet. Certainty creating, I should say. But yeah. So this one, and attractive, this one,
mm-hmm.
and this one, right? And then, yeah, attractive, this one's attractive, and this one's attractive. And certain, this one is certain, and that one is certain. And so now we've got a table with all of them going across.
That is very useful. You might need to email that to me actually after we have our talk, because I'd like to study that more and make pretty patterns. Yeah, because this is, I mean, I already said this earlier, but yeah, because like I'd said, I've been sort of two-dimensional. Here's the tree. You're taking it and wrapping it around and saying, well, I want to draw the connections between every single function. I want to show all their and that's actually suddenly very interesting and fruitful to me. So let's see here. I didn't know if you wanted to, if you had more specifically to say on this, because I can probably keep.
No, I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at it, and yeah, obviously I'm familiar with rational and extroverted, obviously, and then involved is what sensation and feeling have together, and well, linking sensation with feeling, and intuition with thinking, which number of feeling, and then static is NESETIFI. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because each one of those represents a different axis. Okay.
If it's rational and introverted, it has to be static. But if it's irrational and extroverted, it also has to be static.
Right.
So rational exists as the fulcrum for all the other pairs of dichotomies which come after.
Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna have to sit down and like draw this out like many times as I sort of get my brain used to all the possible connections.
All right.
Okay. See, this is legitimately almost like just a different line of inquiry. I know you've talked about this before, but it's only now I think that I'm actually getting the image in my mind that allows me to move it around easier. Where I can see clearly why. So I like this now that I'm like, well, I might be able to come up with more. I don't know. I need to sit down and like work it out, like create little Tinker Toy models. The problem is I don't know how much I can say until I've done that.
No, that's right. I need to let you ruminate.
Yeah,
I need you to ferment these seeds into wonderful chocolate.
Of course, yes.
Yes.
Ferment these seeds.
Ferment these beans into wonderful chocolate. That's what I want from you.
This is what you've been trying to do. You've been very patiently, like throwing these seeds at me. And I'm like, oh, yes. Oh, yes. And you're like, I don't think he gets it yet, but he will.
You've been doing the same.
Oh, well, thank you.
I've been incubating your ideas, and you've been incubating my ideas.
Yes.
It's that's the point. Some of the what I was talking about, as I was trying to say before, your thoughts on the quadras, on alpha versus gamma being these pure contextual versus universal, etc., and the idea that beta and delta were hybrids of it. That's what got me thinking about what quadras actually mean. And the same way I Ching also, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to start thinking about this and terms of other effects that can come about. And both of those, both what I thought about von quadras and that idea of I Ching coming in helped me to help put together these extra two dichotomies, because I knew they were there mathematically speaking.
Right.
I just wasn't sure what they were meant to do and how it all linked up. I think saying that, my friend Ibrahim did have an idea of what they were meant to do. Clearly, it was the case that they were meant to contribute to creating the quadras. We knew they would have to, but it was a question of what that would be, how to define it, and sort of you created the space in which I could start to think about it.
You're welcome. Thank you for thinking about it, because I've actually been. This is a legitimately new line of inquiry for me, other than just filling in more and more of the space I've already. This is opening up new space. So yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm gonna ruminate on that more, and we'll have to. Oh no, we'll have to talk again sometime.
What a shame!
Yeah, I know. I'm not saying like getting off now, obviously, but
I'm happy. If you think we should wrap up now, very happy for that. If you want to talk about other stuff as well, very happy for that.
Well, I've got another 45 minutes or so, and I would love to continue chatting. I'm not sure what other topics there are on.
That's what I'm trying to think about. What else is either it could be fresh, it could be something you just always wanted to discuss. I don't know. Any other ideas you wanted to play around with?
Oh, let me think here for a moment. And hopefully not leave the audience in an awkward moment of as though we're a real conversation. Of course, now my mind is going blank. I mean, I'm instant, because what I've mostly been doing lately is I've been trying to sort all my books to decide which ones I want to take with me out to grad school. Did I mention that to you? That I got accepted to a grad program?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
No, were you in the process of applying and then you were accepted? In which case,
yes, I did get officially accepted. Yeah. So I'm to one of the programs. So I'm very happy about that. So I'll be going into philosophy. So that will be very good. So I've just been deciding which books to take, and it's always interesting looking at all of my old notes in some of these books where I've just been like, that's probably an I, or that's probably an E. Like I just can't turn it off. Which is fascinating to me. But
I think we need someone who's operating in the academic philosophical space to create more literature around these ideas and help that to actually enter into public consciousness more. I think that's a very fertile area to be operating in.
Yeah, I would love to be able to do that, to get to the point where I can, because my goal is to be a professor, and I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna take one class period out of the semester. I don't care what they're telling me I'm supposed to teach on that day. I'm teaching them basic typology principles, because I'm like, this is just practically useful for you to understand. And then the jump from. So I'm going to be doing that. I do actually, this is something very much worth talking about. And it's still in the Jungian realm. So one of the things I've become very interested in, and I've made a few videos about it actually, is quantum mechanics, which we've
Yeah.
talked a little bit about that. I've become very interested in that. The reason is because as I've been studying non-locality, I don't know how much you have heard about that concept.
As in is it anything to do with the positioning of the electrons in the shells?
No, it has to do with entanglement.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a word to describe the sort of paradoxes or the interesting properties you get from entanglement, where specifically where you have two particles that seem to be linked across, vast spaces and can communicate or influence each other or be coordinated, synchronized, irrespective of the speed of light or space and time or any of that. So that's non-locality. So the reason I've become very interested in it is because, well, there's a lot of reasons I've become interested, but one of the things that stuck out to me now is that there's a very Jungian aspect to this that I didn't see before, where synchronicity, where you literally will have these two particles that interacted. The reason that the interaction is just so that we can deduce it, kind of like to if you take two billiard balls and you smack them together, if you knew the energy in both billiard balls and nothing else has interfered with the system, then you hit them together, and if you measure one, you automatically know the other one. And so that's entanglement, sort of the basic principle. And the thing is that, and I don't know how much of this is rehashing for you, but it's helpful for me to run through it.
Helpful for the audience as well.
Yes. Bohr and Heisenberg, the Copenhagen interpretation, said these objects do not have a set amount of I guess you would say energy. That I'm way oversimplifying and probably using the terms wrong, but they do not have defined properties until we measure them. And so Einstein brought up the notion of entanglement in order to say, well, hold on, if they don't have definite properties until measurement, if they're sort of in this weird probability state, this weird ontological state that you're not willing to say it's philosophical, even though it's highly philosophical, Bohr, and that bothers me. But if they really are in this state, then what happens if we hit them together and then we measure one? Then we automatically know what the other one is. So what does the other one do if it was supposedly in this ontological probability state? Well, it must not be in that state anymore, because it must have had. So he was like, so, okay, if we did an experiment where we sent them way far apart and we measured them at the same time and then compared the results and showed, well, they're able to coordinate faster than space and time, and we know that that's not possible. And for a while, there was no way to test it until you had an Irish physicist. I don't know why everybody mentions that he's Irish. I guess it's just fun to say that he's Irish, but I don't know.
His name... The Irish have physicists?
You monster. No, he's an Irish. Yeah, he John Bell, I believe is Bell. Yeah, who came brilliant. Who he as I. So this typology, by the way, the typology in that batch of original quantum physicists, Einstein and Heisenberg and Schrödinger, that's really interesting to me, because and that's a thing maybe to talk about in a minute, but Bell, in an effort to assist Einstein and prove Einstein right, created this way, and it would take too long to get into the specifics, but he created a way you could actually test it to determine whether or not the objects, whether or not it was probable that they had definite properties the entire time they were in transit. And and he was expecting it to be shown that they, of course, would be shown to have definite properties, and there must be a hidden variable, as it is said, which is determining the what those properties will be, and it's not purely random. And of course, they've done the experiment a number of times in very different scenarios and all these things, and every single time Bohr is proved right. So I don't know if you've heard that, but so is where the non-locality notion comes in, because it's like, okay, so it really is that when we measure one, the other instantly changes to compensate for what the first one shows, as it were, because they didn't have definite properties before via the Bell test. So how do they know? And that's where the principle of non-locality comes in, because it says, well, there must be causal factors that don't care about space and time in the normal way. Now, the Jungian notion is asynchronicity, which many people have heard of, because it's sort of a new agey concept, but it's actually very interesting, where literally he's saying it's a causal explanatory principle. And he was using it in the context, Jung was using it in the context of explaining why it would be that people would have dreams and then something from the dream would show up in real life right when he and this patient were talking about it. And like all these weird things that Jung is sort of famous for happening. He was like, well, there must be. So he came up with synchronicity. So that's very interesting. Even though I'm sort of like riding my bicycle right on the line of falling off into the void of new age nonsense. I'm sort of riding right along that line, trying to find a good middle ground. The other reason is because you could make the argument that the collective unconscious could be considered a depending on how you frame it, and there's an argument to be made that Jung sometimes framed it as essentially a non-local connecting system, where on the one hand, he presents it as a purely sort of evolutionary thing, where each individual has their own archetypes and they're operating separately from each other, and it's all local. Everything is happening on a local scale. But other times there's this sense where it seems as though he's arguing that there's this actual connection that is non-local and has this sort of mysterious quality that is able to coordinate. I'm talking a lot here, but the final thing I'll mention is sort of the key thing is this tendency, this ability of photons or quantum particles to coordinate themselves as a group and independently of each other in order to form emergent patterns. And they can do this seemingly without any local causation. So it's a non-local thing. And that's why I think there could be a Jungian connection here, where you could use some of Jung's concepts to help access what's going on here. You could talk about the collective unconscious or the archetypes that are coordinating these things. So I don't know what thoughts you have, but I've been very excited about this.
It presents an interesting conundrum, because we've been talking about intuition and ethics as being these internal information elements rather than external information elements. You can't present an emotion in front of you in a physical way. You can't measure said emotion. The same thing with intuition. It exists in the mind's eye. Nevertheless, we see things ourselves which carry great meaning, which seem to tie different things together. We can see the certain patterns which aren't necessarily obvious in the things themselves. Now, people might not see those patterns which we see. So there's this sort of space that is very unclear, which is seen to be quite subjective. And that leans in quite well this idea of, entanglement, this idea of non-locality, this idea of synchronicity, that there is something there which is not in this sort of very concrete, tangible way, something you can measure reliably, which is why quantum mechanics is so difficult. You can't measure it reliably. Nevertheless, things are cohering, things are interacting, which are creating effects. It's often been a moment of puzzlement talking, for instance, about extroverted ethics, extroverted feeling, because on the one hand, it is an internal information element.
Right.
Yet for an internal information element, it sure as hell unites a lot of people together. This idea of emotional contagion is almost something physical that reaches out and affects you. Oh, it isn't. There's no medium across which it is traveling. It is not some sort of substance, some sort of virus that enters the body. It is the emotions of one person happening to ring with the emotions of other people to create some sort of combinatory effect, much like how you describe photons operating independently and yet in unison. at this
Yes.
very time. So, and that is sort of the point of emotional contagion. It can reach out over far greater distances in a way which introverted ethics can't, because one-to-one relationships. But
Yes.
nevertheless, this idea of things cohering without some actual physical bond tying them together is what is so fascinating and so interesting about, and this idea of
Yeah.
some of Jungian cognitive function ideas tying in synchronicity and the collective unconscious being other ideas of Jung, which are also very important to Jung's work, which all seem to be tying into this effect. The idea, and it is the ultimate, the conundrum, if summarized most clearly and succinctly, is the intangible effector.
Right. Run that by me one more time.
The intangible effector, the thing creating effects, which is
Right.
itself intangible. The
Right.
almost like the ghost in the machine, the soul
Yes.
leaving the body. That sort of idea.
See, that makes me that's why I wanted to clarify that we were on the same page when you're saying that, because that was actually what led me into being interested in quantum mechanics. Originally, the paper I was working on to submit a piece of work as part of my application to these places was concerned with the mind-body problem and the problem of consciousness, and trying to approach that. And sort of one of the approaches, the main approach that I came to was being like, well, that led me into quantum mechanics and got me very excited, was realizing, so the assumption that is often implicitly being made when people are trying to make the mind a mechanistic production of the brain and are having trouble, or going the other way and trying to make the brain somehow a sort of projection of the mind, or some more kind of mystical thing. The problem that people run into with trying to make these two things go together is they want things to be able to, they don't think of it this way, but they want things to be able to touch and to push each other. And they want to be able to say, well, so how is the mind making the body do these things? How is it cause? Because we think of causation as being a tangible thing, as something that reaches in and in some sense, that is what locality means. Is locality means that things affect each other by touching in some way, either through a force or some other thing, and everything's regulated by the speed of light. And that is what determines the limits of what counts as local. And so, but if you are willing to get rid of that, and you start asking the question, because I'd never thought about this before, but it's something that you realize, the very notion of like electromagnetic force or some of these things, that in some sense is an intangible thing. It's this force where, like, how is it that, or gravity again, like, it seems to have this, that was one of the big controversies when Newton came out with gravity, actually, was that people were like, this is action at a distance. This isn't mechanistic. This is some kind of weird occult property. You're going back to alchemical studies, Newton. And Newton had to defend himself against that. But we still haven't found what the medium is. Einstein was sort of proposing the time-space approach in general relativity. But this notion that things can somehow have an influence on each other without physically touching. I don't know. There was something that I've become very interested in that.
Well, that's exactly the point. Things physically touching is an illusion.
Yes,
Nothing
exactly.
Actually physically touches.
Nothing touches. That is, because of the, I say, oh, they're touching, but they're not. It's the electromagnetic force. And suddenly it's very freeing in sort of this Sartrean nauseating everything is floating sort of way. But suddenly realizing, oh, okay, so this doesn't solve the mind-body problem, but it certainly frees up some of the problems at least I was running into, of that's not the question of how is the mechanistically the soul stuff, or is there even soul stuff or whatever, how is that moving the brain? It doesn't need to touch it or move it. You can have as many substances as you want, and they can have influences on each other just because, or through some other principle. The one other thing, oh, well, you go.
I was saying the notion of things touching to affect each other is entrapping.
Yes. You seem to have already thought about this, which is very interesting. It's like you were like, oh, of course, Michael.
No, I wouldn't say. I sort of, I don't know. I sort of pre-think things, and then they sort of talk to other people about them. It's like I haven't actually properly set out my thoughts in this. But I've been saying things, they're clicking together in my head.
No, you're good. No, it was actually making me excited that I was like, ooh, I feel so validated. Because I feel like I think I'm actually the kind of person who automatically assumes, well, they must be touching. And I didn't realize I was having to think in this very...
Everyone does.
Yeah.
Because that's what it looks like to us, and that's how we've learned to think. And so we are trapped we're trapped in a limited understanding of how physical things work based on our experiences. And you have to almost break out of your experiences to actually understand how the world really works. But in doing so, that could certainly open things up to a lot of things working in ways which don't make sense to how we used to seeing the world working. And quantum entanglement is potentially a prime example of that.
Yes. Yeah. It was a wonderful... I think it was actually in... what's his name? Lange, I think. He was like an 1800s guy. He wrote a history or critique of materialism or something like this. It was one of the books that Nietzsche actually read and was very influential on him. It was interesting. But one of the things that he pointed out in that book, I have not read it myself, but it was a quotation that really struck me, where he says, we've gotten so used to talking about forces and things, basically having an influence on each other, and we don't ever talk about how they're doing this. We've just kind of gotten used to it. When the mechanistic philosophers of the 1700s and the 1600s would have been appalled at this, because they're like, but, they're not touching. How are they having the effect? And he's like, in some sense, he had more, even though they were wrong, he had more respect for them, because at least they were trying, they had a clearer principle rather than just sort of accepting it. But there was something about that I was like, oh, this is so freeing, because I've just felt sort of oppressed by some of these other... there was another thing I wanted to talk about that's sort of going back to something you were pointing out, the notion of social contagion, and how, that is extreme. FE, that sort of the contradiction that seems implicit there, that it is this internal element, but it is wholly externally focused and you have images in your head of like the notion of the zeitgeist, the feeling of the times, or the image that pops into a lot of people's head is the horrible phenomenon of Nazi Germany, and some of the stuff going on there. I mean, Jung commenting on that, was sort of fascinating. Him pointing out, it's like magic. Hitler is a magician. He is someone he's like a sorcerer. He has captured people's imaginations, and it's as I've been learning about the history of quantum mechanics, which is happening at the same time as all of this stuff, and it's been very interesting seeing, it's very difficult not to see parallels with today. I'm not intending to take a political side in this, but you can see it in a lot of different areas where I'm suddenly able to recognize the power of, like, I remember when I've experienced it for myself. I remember when I first was getting into Jordan Peterson, I remember feeling like a gust of wind or something, like there was this almost exulting sense at times, even though I tended to be more detached from it, but I could feel the excitement that was clearly like motivating all these other people, of being like, is he like the Messiah or something? Like, I'm making fun, but like, it's almost like you get that sense, you get so excited, and it's happening individually in everybody. It's very interesting.
It was as if a completely different narrative which had existed but hadn't actually entered into the zeitgeist in
Yes.
many, many decades, had
Yes.
suddenly re-entered into that zeitgeist and was
Yeah.
making a point of view known which contradicted what the rest of the stream was saying, had been
Yes.
developing from the 70s, I'd say, or even the 60s,
Yeah.
through to the modern day. This sort of more sort of questioning part after the Vietnam War. This idea is the West right in what it's doing? Are we actually doing things correctly? Should we actually be
Yeah.
should we be breaking some of that down and maybe trying to pursue, a new understanding of what is right? And Jordan Peterson's ideas was almost a sort of new force pushing back against that in that
Yeah.
zeitgeist. And,
Yes.
and and also the zeitgeist is something which has become more and more powerful over time
Yes.
because of the internet, because of the ability.
Yes.
It's a thicker, far more viscous. Viscous is the right word. It's a thicker medium through which ideas can travel than it ever was before. It used to be, you circulate your newspapers, or it'll be a mouth, word to mouth, you could say.
Yeah.
Um, but now, word of mouth, I should say. But now, you need an idea or an image or a meme posted online. It travels everywhere and gets
Hmm.
everyone excited around an idea, whether that excitement is anger or something else. Usually it's anger, but
Yeah.
it gets some sort of reaction and leads to real action. And yeah, that's an also interesting idea, this idea of magnetism. We think of magnetism in the person, which has a magnetic personality. And
Yeah.
people assume that just means, the ability to attract others to them. But it's more than that. Magnetism, how magnetism works is that it aligns all the
Yes.
different parts in the metal, and that creates that magnetic effect. In the
Yes.
same way, a magnetic personality doesn't just attract people to them, it aligns people together in
Yes.
them being able to act in the direction they want it to go. And that
Arguably, it doesn't just align people in line with what they want. It does both sides. Everybody falls into place around them, either attacking them or coming together with them. And you could certainly argue that with Peterson. His polarization, you could say. You get these people who, and the fascinating thing is that by all accounts, it seems that Peterson certainly was not intending this to happen. He made use of it, but he kind of, there was that one moment I remember in one of his talks where someone who was mentally unbalanced, they were mentally ill, but they rushed up onto the stage and were like, it was like they were like praying to him, or like trying to, not literally praying, but they were like begging him for help. And he was just like, and then later he was able to, so it wasn't like, it could have been a lot worse. But it was like, but seeing his reaction and kind of like how he's just like, I mean, I'm glad I could help people, but like, he's just flabbergasted by how strong the reaction is in these people. And it's like,
it overwhelms him frequently.
Yes, which is it's like he didn't shoot, he just happened to be the node who could channel, he had the right talents and he decided to engage with it. Yeah, that's
why people think, I know, and even sociologists, a lot of people think he could be an ENFJ or
sure.
I mean, I don't think it myself, because I don't think that aligns with what his intentions actually were.
No.
But he's been cast in the model of that sort of prophet.
Yes.
Sort of,
yes.
And he has had a huge influence on the zeitgeist, even that might not have been why exactly how he was doing it. In the same way, people could have an idea of how, I don't know, a prophet like, say, Muhammad or Jesus may have been, or Moses may have been. They might not actually been how they actually were, but that's how the narrative has become around them over time. That has become this sort of more sort of zeitgeist influencing figure, and that actually was the purpose, rather than, no, they're just doing this in that particular way, and that's happened to have an effect on people.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. There was something else I was going to say, but no, I can't remember. I have been distracted because I was thinking of this other thing, which is somewhat unrelated. I'm jumping all over the place, but in relation to the non-locality and well, actually, two things. One is what we've been talking about reminds me a great deal of Emil Durkheim, who I don't know how familiar you are with
Emil
Durkheim.
Durkheim. I don't know Emil Durkheim. I can look him
Oh,
up.
really? Oh, he's a fascinating. I discovered him a couple of years ago, and for whatever reason, he's just really struck me. I suspect he's an INTP,
Mm-hmm.
though I've toyed with the idea he's an ISFJ. But anyway, he was one of the he's one of the principal sociologists, sort of one of the main sociological thinkers, and one of his books that was particularly striking to me was well, he did sort of his two main works was one was simply called Suicide, where he was approaching the problem of suicide from the angle of this can be analyzed as a not just as an individual phenomenon, but as this sociological phenomenon. And what he means by that seems very interesting. What he seems to want to say is kind of what we've been talking about, that there are influences or factors that seem to have an effect on a whole population, and the individuals are just individual cells. The reason for this, and I need to confirm this data if this is still accurate, but at least the data he seemed to be working on, and this was in the late 1800s, so
Yeah.
but the data he was working on, the suicide numbers that they had were very regular, so that they could literally just predict how many people were going to commit suicide in a given area in a given year, given certain fact. Like, it was very, as I understand it, at least at that time, the data was very regular, and this is what led him to think this doesn't seem to be. You would think it would be more random or less predictable if it was just a purely individual thing, and it's kind of a disturbing hypothesis, obviously, but he's approaching it in this very dispassionate way. And then he wrote another book called The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, where he was really expounding on this idea that there are, in that one he was talking about the importance of symbols and totems that become the center piece of a community, and that seem to have these almost magical effects on primitive tribes and but not just there, in modern society, where people will it's like they have a form of magnetism that will energize people to fall into place around them and coordinate themselves. And I've just become very interested in this idea of non-local forces and sort of what's going on here. One of the examples that I was reading in sort of trying to understand Derrida better. I was reading another French philosopher named Ferdinand de Saussure, if you're familiar with him. Yeah, I was reading his course.
No, I'm looking him up.
Yeah. He wrote, or he's sort of most famous for, he did Course in General Linguistics, I think is what it's called, and which Derrida's one of his first books of grammatology was in direct response to. And actually, I think reading Course in General Linguistics is essential for understanding of grammatology. Anyway, one of the things that he points out, it's I haven't finished it, but it's a brilliant book. Some of the things he brings out in Course in General Linguistics. And one of the things he mentions is this notion of, he's talking about language, and he's saying the thing about languages, and I'm going to see if I can remember how he phrased it. But what it kind of came down to for me was he was implying that the strange thing about languages is that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, for an individual to go in and tamper with the language to any extensive degree. Certainly you can't change the grammar. That doesn't seem to be how languages evolve. They seem to have their own life, and you can't have a single individual go in and say, English hitherto has been about the order of the words in the sentence, but from now on we're going to do it like Latin, and we're going to have conjugations and stuff. Like, obviously that just doesn't work, and that kind of seems to go without saying. But even like more simple things, it's very difficult to change. And he's saying, and yet language does change. So why is it changing? What are the forces that are changing it? And he was coming at it from the perspective of, because you'll get these puns and you'll get these little convergences and things. And so he's talking about it in sort of this Darwinian way, where he's saying, oh, things are just happening to converge together, and it looks like it's meaningful, but it's really not, because we can trace back. And my brain is sitting there being like, well, what if there is something behind it that is leading to, what if, what if there, and what this would ultimately lead to is some pretty bad intellectual heresies, such as saying that there is more to etymology than, that you can make more out of etymological arguments or out of puns and things, and you kind of get into this James Joyce's almost worshipping of language. But I was like, well, what if there's something to that? Because that'd be kind of interesting, because some of these, the word he kept using was fortuitous, which was, it reminded me of some of the things that happen in quantum mechanics, where things seem to line up in this way, and it's like, how did they coordinate over time? So
it's fortuity in the eye of the beholder. That's the thing.
Yes.
And I wonder about that. I mean, it could be that these words, yes, they seem to come from different sources and not actually cohere, but they happen to pun or rhyme quite well. That maybe they actually do rhyme again in the language may have evolved from. If it goes back to maybe Latin or Greek or even Aramaic, they may have actually diverged at that point, and maybe it chimes again in another language, which caused that thing to actually cross over. So I don't know. I found, I don't know, even we're talking about, say, magnetism and how that sort of matches up to charm and charisma. There are other sorts of ideas and concepts which do seem to sort of allied and almost seem entangled in their own semantics.
Yeah. Well, certainly Nietzsche makes the argument that there is a grammar and semantics and things exercise, the logic of the words and the way in which they're used exercises a much greater influence on sort of the logic of different people's thinking, which leads naturally to certain outcomes. And it's difficult to think of an example, but one of the examples he gives is, our language has the notion of subject and object, or even just like the notion of I. And it's like, well, that influences your thinking to think of things in a certain way, and means that psychologically you're much more likely to be influenced to do this rather than this. I don't know if that's quite what you were getting at the end there, but
well, that point reminds me of people saying that E equals MC squared was a prejudiced equation.
Oh, I haven't heard this.
I can't remember why did they say.
Oh, was this sort of a woke thing? Was it?
Yes.
Oh no. Oh, no.
But even the use of, say, passive language, this had that thing done to it, as opposed to active language. This did that.
This did that. Yeah.
Shape is meant to shape perceptions, and that sort of may have opened the way towards a constructivist understanding of the world around us. That language is used. I think Foucault talks about this as well. The idea of a language is used to control perceptions, and Derrida also lends into that. You've marginalized one understanding by using words in one way. I can talk about things being attractive as opposed to repulsive. If I'm choosing attractive rather than repulsive, I have moved the attention towards attractive as being the norm and repulsive as being the divergent one. And all the other ones I did there. But and then there's that idea that then shapes our understanding. So it does lead itself in. I wasn't sure that was the same thing as we were talking about before, about these different words and puns causing language to change, because that is where people almost identifying commonalities. Puns are suddenly are surprise commonalities between things thought to have been different. It's this idea
Right.
of surprise, which often exists in much of comedy. That subverted
Yes.
expectations makes it the pun. So a subverted expectation of commonality found in the different of a pun can lead to ring in people's minds and use those words in the same way, almost interchangeably, leading the language to change and fluctuate over time because it rings more, people use it more,
Right.
and that is more outcompetes more traditional forms of words, which then leads to an example: people saying that someone is ignorant when they're just being rude, or
Right.
and examples such as that. It just they've made an association, not really a pun, but it's an association
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that has made people use that word more. So the word is evolving, it's changing in how it's used. So I think there's something like that going on, and maybe it's the case that it's not just a surprise. Maybe the pun is a false pun. Maybe it's not
Right.
really a surprise that commonality was found in difference. The only reason it subverted expectations was because of ignorance. And there was
Right.
a commonality found further back, if you look further back, but we don't know.
Right. Yeah. 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 And the sort of ultimate form of the argument of sort of, if you want to push the notion of synchronicity to the utmost sort of disconcerting point, you would have to have, a coincidence that, say, a fortuitous pun that is so fortuitous, that truly fortuitous, that you can't seem to rationalize how it could have come up to that point. It would have to be something that is a true coincidence. It's totally random, and yet, so miracles basically would kind of be the word that people use, and seem is part of why, it's one of those places where Jung enters into and kind of gets into trouble, because he's sort of has this latent religiousness to some of the things that he says, where he's bringing in synchronicity, and it's like, well, religious people used to call that a miracle, Jung. They said that God told the butterfly with the broken wing from so and so's dream that represents the relationship with their mother to show up at the windowsill right as you're talking about it, and it's like, but is there the non-local element would be to say, well, are there influences in addition to the more traditional local influences that would, cause it gets into and we don't have much time left, but you get into the question of what even constitutes an explanation. Why do we seek explanations for things? And what are we seeking when we seek an explanation that would make us feel more comfortable with certain things lining up in a certain way? One of the things that usually seems to constitute an explanation is to show how there are these local causes, specifically like this thing pushed this thing into this place. I'm kind of fumbling here a bit, but
I think even that idea, that need for explanation, and
yeah,
I wouldn't say that the deltas need explanation so much. And it's why I think I've noticed a number of delta NFs, they're likely to just accept certain ideas or perspectives given across, which weren't necessarily we don't actually fit together with other people's perceptions. So, well, that's their truth, that's their understanding.
right.
That idea being, is that's their perspective, and it's it feels true to them. And
Right.
yeah, and the point is, because the world is uncertain, it's so uncertain, we don't feel like we can tell them that that's not the truth.
Right. Whereas, yeah, because they do generally seem to be much more comfortable with or much more likely to say, well, you keep looking for an explanation, Michael. You want a rational explanation to this, but that's not the most interesting thing. As what's more interesting is the meaning this has for the individual person. And I'm like, but that's a cop-out.
and that meaning for the individual person doesn't need to make sense, it just has to be useful.
Yes. Well, I should probably head off unless you had...
I just wanted to see if anyone asked any questions going back.
Oh, sure.
The answer. Because I did ask at some point. Guys, feel free to ask questions, I said. So let me just... Here we go.
Good heavens, there is a chat going on here.
We've got one from Winston. You know, John Barnes has been tuning in.
Oh, has he?
Yeah, he has been. Oh, I'm going to say hello in just a minute. Okay, so Winston's mum just asks, those who speak more MBTI than socionics, please give us a quick primer on differences in the last letters in socionics, small j's versus p's. Right. So,
yes.
So what that, in socionics, it means something slightly different. So it is about having as your leading function a rational information element. And the idea is that if you go into the model A, every single, there's always a function at the beginning of every single block, which is the accepting function. It like sets the need, which the producing function then tries to match. So every block has 1 and 2, and it's the one of the two, the first one, which is, if you're a rational type, that's going to be a rational element. If you're an irrational type, it's going to be an irrational element. And that little j means you're a rational type, little p means you're an irrational type. So that's different from Myers-Briggs type indicator, which instead describes a j type as someone who has an extroverted judging function in one of the first 2 function slots. So that's what it means. They're the differences between the two, because that's the same for extroverts anyway, but for introverts it's different. Hence the idea of a JP switch. Let's see what else was asked. Let's see if I can find. I think that was the only question. Oh yeah, John's showing his face here. Volume
yes.
Yeah, there are two more discussions before this, John. Feel free to watch them through.
Yeah, I'm seeing. I was on private chat. And I was like, wow, no one's saying anything. And then I went to comments and was like, holy crap. I'm going to have to watch through this later and see what people are saying while we were talking. That's probably for the best, though, because usually when I am trying to read the chat while talking, it just throws my brain off totally.
Yeah, but, I found that I ignore, when I do an interview, I basically switch to private chat now. I do not watch what people are commenting, because that can throw off my listening, and that's not constructive. I then afterwards. Last question. Take one last question from your Huckleberry. Has Michael ever been in a fist fight?
That's I don't think I've ever been asked that question. I'm trying to think. Have I? No. The only thing I can think of is there was one time in grade school where I was punched, and that's the closest thing. I've like wrestled people, but those weren't really fist fights. Those were like good, hearty, manly wrestling, whatever, when we were kids. Yes, I have been punched in the face before. That wasn't a happy time. I don't really care to get into it, but that's the closest that I've ever been in. There is a well, yeah. I shouldn't be backseat running the chat. But I just noticed.
That's fine. Which one do you want to?
I just noticed there's a question like Michael. So this is Spacey NYC.
Oh, Spacey.
Like Michael's ENFP friend, how do we know his friend isn't an EIE, since ENFPs commonly convert to EIE? EIE would be ethical, intuitive extrovert, correct? So
I'm just trying to find it so I can show it up, but it's okay if we don't find it, because
I
lost.
But it was way back at like 1029. So
okay.
How do we know his friend isn't an EIE?
Oh, here we go. Got it.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I have not. I actually haven't heard of ENFPs commonly converting to EI. Oh, are you talking? I'm assuming they're talking about converting when converting between MBTI to socionics.
It builds on what he said before, which is it seems that we're speaking from our own respective understandings of functions. But if they are defined functions different at a fundamental level, then what's going on? Well, I say we both have our understandings. That's true. We also understand, I think, enough about each other's understanding, sort of find commonality. Which is kind of why I like talking to Michael. He's got a big brain, and he can make space for some of my ideas, and hopefully vice versa. So yeah, there is some differences there in our understanding, but we find so much that's interesting in common. There is some good quantum entanglement in our different approaches to Jung, which is why I like bringing him on. But the other point, like Michael's ENFP friend, how do we know his friend isn't an EIE? Well, we don't. He could be an EIE. We'd have to check. But what Michael's also describing is a sort of irritation effect based on creating a lack of clarity in what's going on, which already suggests to me that maybe he is ENFP. That's the thing. Michael has come up with ideas in his book Motes and Beams, which are not talked about by Myers-Briggsy people. Not really. They are quite original to Michael, but they happen to have a lot of intersection with socionics. Hence, why there's this fertile ground for interaction and discussion. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. We don't know for sure, but it sounds to me that from Michael is saying about them, it probably is maybe an IE, maybe something slightly different. Yeah. Okay.
And I do see one last minute question from Peter Dentis.
Peter Dentis. Oh, here we go. Okay, last one, and then we'll.
This will be our last one, and then.
What do you think of Linda Barron's recent descriptor for NE as interpreting and NI envisioning? You want to answer that one first?
Sure. I'm not familiar with Linda Barron's.
She came up with this idea of interaction styles. She's one of those.
Okay. I see.
Theorists who's also been coming up with stuff for cognitive functions, how to understand the types in different ways to help with coaching and other stuff. She's
right.
worked with Darren Nardi before and other people. But
okay.
Yeah. What do you think of that?
Well, it's easy to well, I shouldn't say easy, but you come up with two different words. I'm not sure how she defines or interprets those two words in the context of NE versus NI. I because I'm familiar with, the whole milieu of typology, I'm pretty sure I know what she's getting at with that but I don't know how much of that is just me filling the word with my own sort of interpretation of saying, well, I'm assuming she is saying interpreting in terms of, I will interpret all these different things in sort of one category, whereas NI has this visionary quality. I don't know. I'd have to read through what she said on the subject, but
yeah.
So I'm kind of avoiding the question, I suppose, but I don't know if I could answer coherently.
And I would agree with you on that point, but there's a lot of what I've observed in some of the MBTI community. People say things, they mean different things, because they say it in a way which other people can interpret in their own way. They identify as agreeing when actually they're not agreeing. My SI parents are so, my SJ parents are so annoying. Why are they annoying? Well, one says because they are too boring and traditional. The other one says because they're too sort of restrictive and narrow-minded. But those aren't necessarily the same things. But that happens quite a lot. So we, as you say, we need to know what Linda Barron's means by interpreting and visioning. But sure, I could very easily see in my understanding of NE and NI where both those words would be appropriate. The question is, what does she mean by them? And it's hard to get words that are so clear that you couldn't possibly interpret a different understanding of them. That's already kind of shown why I think interpret actually does kind of work with NE. Just from saying that. But yeah, it is hard to do. Michael, thank you so much for coming on again. You've been absolutely fabulous.
Oh, thank you. It's always a great pleasure, Jack. Thank you for having me. I really impressed. I'm going to ruminate on the Excel sheet. And thank you for listening to me babble about quantum mechanics as I figure these things out. I do enjoy it. So I'm glad you seem to enjoy it too.
I do indeed. All right.
All right.
Take care and see you soon.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.